Maria Santos wiped down the red vinyl booth for the third time that morning, her mind wandering to the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table. The morning rush at Romano's family restaurant was winding down, leaving behind the familiar smell of coffee and bacon that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She had been working these same tables for 3 years now, and every regular customer knew exactly how she liked her coffee and which booth gave her the best view of Main Street. At 28, Maria had dreams that stretched far beyond the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Hidden in her purse was a business degree she had earned through 4 years of night classes, studying after her double shifts while most people her age were out having fun. But in a town where the biggest employer was the furniture factory and most young people left for bigger cities, opportunities felt as rare as snow in July. Romano's wasn't just Maria's workplace. It was the beating heart of Millbrook. Every morning, the same group of retired men gathered in the corner booth to solve the world's problems over endless cups of coffee. Mrs. Peterson celebrated her birthday there every year with her grandchildren, ordering the same chocolate cake she had been getting for 15 years. High school students came after football games, still wearing their muddy uniforms, cramming into booths and sharing plates of French fries while they talked about their weekend plans. The restaurant belonged to Tony Romano, a 72-year-old man whose thick Italian accent still colored every word even after 50 years in America. Tony had built Romano's from nothing, starting with a small corner diner in 1983 and slowly expanding until it became the gathering place where marriages were celebrated. Business deals were made, and the community came together during both good times and bad. Maria loved the old man like a grandfather. Tony always made sure she got extra hours when her family needed help, and he never complained when she had to study during slow periods. He knew about her business degree and often joked that she was too smart to be stuck in his little restaurant forever. But lately, Tony looked tired in a way that worried Maria. His wife had passed away 2 years ago, and his medical bills were piling up faster than his income could cover them. The whole town was struggling, really. Main Street, which had once bustled with small family businesses, now had several empty storefronts with faded for rent signs that had been there so long they were starting to peel. The Chen family still ran their flower shop, where 3 generations had learned the business of making people smile with beautiful arrangements. The Martinez family kept their barbershop going, where fathers brought their sons for their first haircuts just like their grandfathers had done decades before. But everyone was feeling the pressure. Online shopping had hurt the small retailers. Young families were moving to bigger towns where there were more job opportunities. The tax base was shrinking and city services were being cut. Still, the people who remained loved Millbrook, with a fierce loyalty that outsiders often found hard to understand. That loyalty was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. The news came on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place among the flannel shirts and work boots of Romano's regular customers. Richard Blackstone had made his fortune in technology, building apps and websites that millions of people used every day. At 45, he was worth over $2 billion and owned properties in major cities across the country. But Blackstone wasn't interested in big cities anymore. He had discovered that small towns with historic charm could be transformed into luxury destinations for wealthy people looking to escape urban life. Millbrook, with its tree-lined streets and well-preserved 19th-century buildings, had caught his attention during a drive through Pennsylvania's countryside. The billionaire's plan was simple and devastating. He wanted to buy the entire downtown block, demolish most of the existing buildings, and replace them with luxury condominiums and upscale retail shops. He would keep a few of the oldest buildings for their historic charm, but they would be converted into expensive restaurants and boutique stores that would cater to wealthy residents, not the working families who had called Millbrook home for generations. Maria first heard about the plan from Mrs. Chen, who rushed into Romano's that Tuesday morning with tears in her eyes and a letter in her shaking hands. The letter was from Blackstone's development company, offering to buy her flower shop for 3 times what it was worth. It sounded generous until you realized that the money wouldn't be enough to buy a similar property anywhere within 50 miles. And at 68 years old, Mrs. Chen was too old to start over somewhere else. More letters arrived throughout the week. Every business owner on Main Street received the same offer, and every property owner was told they could sell now for a good Price or wait and be forced out. Later, when property taxes rose to pay for the infrastructure improvements the new development would require, Tony received his letter on Friday afternoon during the lunch rush. Maria watched his face turn pale as he read it, his hands trembling slightly as he folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't say anything about it until after the restaurant closed, when Maria was counting the register and getting ready to go home. "They want to buy Romano's," Tony said quietly, sitting heavily in his favorite booth near the window. "The letter says I can keep running the restaurant for 6 months while they get their permits, but after that..." He shrugged, the gesture conveying years of defeat in a single moment. Maria felt her heart sink into her stomach. "How much are they offering?" "Enough to pay off my debts and have something left over for retirement," Tony admitted. "More money than this place has ever been worth, probably more than it ever will be worth again. But you're not going to sell, right?" Maria asked, though she could already see the answer in his tired eyes. "I don't know, mija," Tony said, using the Spanish word for daughter that he had picked up from Maria's family. "I'm old, I'm tired, and I can't afford to fight a billionaire. Maybe it's time." That night, Maria walked home through downtown Millbrook, looking at the familiar storefronts with new eyes. The barber shop where her father had taken her brother for his first haircut. The pharmacy where old Mr. Patel still remembered everyone's names and knew their family's medical histories by heart. The bookstore where she had spent countless hours as a child, reading stories about people who changed the world. All of it could be gone within a year, replaced by stores that sold things most people in Millbrook couldn't afford, inhabited by people who saw the town as a charming weekend retreat rather than a living, breathing community. Maria's younger brother Diego was a junior at Penn State, studying engineering with dreams of designing bridges and buildings that would last for generations. She had been working double shifts for 3 years to help pay his tuition, believing that education was the key to a better future for their family. But what good was a better future if there was no community left to come home to? Standing in front of Romano's that night, looking through the window at the empty tables and chairs where so many important moments had happened, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to let her hometown disappear without a fight. She didn't know how one waitress could stand up to a billionaire, but she was going to find a way. The next morning, Maria arrived at work early and started making phone calls. Maria spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for the town hall meeting. She had filled a notebook with facts and figures about local businesses, employment numbers, and family histories that went back generations. Her hands shook every time she practiced her speech in front of the bathroom mirror, but she kept going. This wasn't just about Romano's anymore. This was about everyone she had grown up with, everyone who had made this town feel like home. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, a converted old church that had been serving as Millbrook's gathering place for over 30 years. By 6:30, cars were parked 3 blocks away in every direction. Maria had never seen so many people in one place in her entire life. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years stood side by side, united by uncertainty about their future. Tony Romano sat in the 3rd row, wearing his best suit that still smelled faintly of mothballs. Mrs. Chen had closed her flower shop early and brought her entire family. The Martinez brothers from the barber shop were there with their wives and children. Even teenagers who usually avoided anything involving adults had shown up, sensing that something important was happening to their world. Maria found a seat near the back, her stomach churning with nervous energy. She had told her family about her plan to speak at the meeting, and her mother had spent the entire previous evening trying to talk her out of it. "Mija, you're just a waitress," her mother had said, not unkindly but with the worry that comes from a lifetime of watching powerful people crush ordinary dreams. What can you possibly say to a billionaire that will change his mind? But Maria's brother Diego had surprised her with his support. Home from college for the weekend, he had helped her organize her notes and practice her argument. "Someone has to speak for us," he had said simply. "And you know this place better than anyone. You know what makes it special." Richard Blackstone arrived exactly at 7 o'clock in a black luxury car that probably cost more than most people in Millbrook made in 2 years. He walked into the community center like he owned it, which Maria realized with a chill that he probably would very soon. Everything about the man screamed money and power, from his perfectly tailored suit to his confident stride, to the way his assistants followed half a step behind him, tablets in hand and Bluetooth earpieces flashing. The billionaire was younger than Maria had expected, maybe in his mid-40s with the kind of polished appearance that comes from expensive haircuts and personal trainers. His smile was practiced and professional, the kind he probably used in boardrooms and television interviews. But his eyes were cold, already calculating how much profit he could squeeze from every square foot of their downtown. Mayor Johnson, a nervous man who had been elected mostly because no one else wanted the job, introduced Blackstone with the kind of stammering respect usually reserved for visiting celebrities. The billionaire took the microphone with easy confidence, as if he had done this presentation 100 times before. "Good evening. Millbrook," Blackstone began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "I'm here tonight to share an exciting opportunity that will transform your community into something truly special." He clicked a remote, and a large screen behind him lit up with architectural drawings and computer-generated images of gleaming buildings, manicured lawns, and well-dressed people walking along pristine sidewalks. The new Millbrook looked like a magazine advertisement for luxury living, beautiful and completely soulless. "Heritage Millbrook will be a premier destination community," Blackstone continued, gesturing at the images. "We're talking about a $40 million investment that will bring jobs, increase property values, and put your town on the map. These luxury residences will attract successful professionals who will contribute to your tax base and support local businesses." An elderly man near the front raised his hand tentatively. "What about the businesses that are already here? My family has run the hardware store for 35 years. Blackstone's smile never wavered, but Maria noticed how his eyes quickly dismissed the questioner. "That's the beauty of progress," he said smoothly. "The new development will have retail space for businesses that can serve our residents' needs. High-end services, specialty shops, restaurants with 5-star potential. We're raising the bar for everyone." Mrs. Chen stood up, her voice shaking but determined. "Mr. Blackstone, my flower shop has been here for 28 years. I know every family in this town. I made the flowers for their weddings, their funerals, their graduations. Will there be space for me in your new development?" The billionaire consulted his tablet briefly. "Mrs. Chen, correct? We received your property survey. That's actually prime real estate for our main retail plaza. I'm sure there are other locations where a flower shop would be more appropriate for your customer base." The dismissal was polite but clear. Maria felt anger building in her chest like a fire spreading through dry wood. Around the room, she could see the same reaction on other faces. People were beginning to understand that this wasn't about improving their community. It was about replacing it entirely. For 20 minutes, Blackstone fielded questions with practiced ease, always steering the conversation back to property values and investment returns. He spoke about their town like it was a business problem to be solved, not a place where real people had built real lives. Every answer made it clearer that he had already decided everything, and this meeting was just a formality to get through before the real work began. Finally, Mayor Johnson announced that they would take a few more questions before wrapping up. Several hands went up around the room, but Maria found herself standing before she had consciously decided to do it. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. But her voice came out steady and clear. "Mr. Blackstone, I have a question." The billionaire looked at her with mild interest, probably expecting another easily deflected concern about parking or construction noise. "Yes, Miss Maria Santos. I work at Romano's restaurant." She paused, looking around the room at faces she had known her entire life. "You keep talking about bringing successful professionals to our town, about raising property values and creating jobs. But what about the people who already live here? What about the families who have called Millbrook home for generations?" Blackstone's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Well, obviously current residents will benefit from increased property values and new economic opportunities. Will they?" Maria interrupted, her confidence growing with each word. "Because Mrs. Chen can't afford to pay 3 times more in rent? For a flower shop that serves wealthy strangers instead of the neighbors she's known for 30 years. Mr. Martinez can't afford to move his barbershop to some other town and start over at 70 years old. Tony Romano built his restaurant from nothing to serve this community, not to impress people who see our town as a weekend hobby." The room had gone completely quiet. Even the teenagers in the back were paying attention now, sensing that something real was happening. Maria took a deep breath and continued. "You're not improving our community, Mr. Blackstone. You're erasing it. You're taking everything that makes Millbrook special and replacing it with something that looks nice in your marketing materials but has no soul, no history, no connection to the people who actually live here. Blackstone's polite mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Ms. Santos, I understand that change can be difficult, but sentimentality doesn't pay bills. If these businesses were truly viable, they would be profitable enough to afford market-rate rents. What I'm offering is economic reality. The condescension in his voice lit a fire in Maria that she didn't know she possessed. Economic reality for who? Profitable for who? You think value is just what shows up on your bank statement, but you're wrong. This community has value you can't measure in dollars. It has people who care about each other, who show up when someone needs help, who remember your name and ask about your family. That's worth more than all your luxury condos combined. Her voice was getting stronger now, fueled by years of watching her neighbors struggle and fight and support each other through good times and bad. You want to talk about economic reality? Here's some reality for you. When Mrs. Peterson was in the hospital last year, this community raised $5,000 for her medical bills in 2 weeks. When the Martinez family lost their house in that fire 3 years ago, 20 families opened their doors to help them get back on their feet. When kids can't afford school supplies, the businesses on Main Street find ways to help. Maria looked directly at Blackstone, no longer intimidated by his expensive suit or his billions of dollars. You can't buy that kind of community, Mr. Blackstone. You can't manufacture it in your luxury development. And you can't understand it because you've never had to depend on anything that money couldn't buy. The community center erupted in applause. People stood up clapping and shouting their agreement. Maria felt tears in her eyes but kept standing, meeting Blackstone's furious gaze without flinching. The billionaire's face had turned red with anger, his practiced composure completely gone. When the applause finally died down, his voice was... Maria woke up Friday morning feeling like she had survived a storm. Her phone had been buzzing all night with messages from friends and neighbors, people telling her how proud they were that someone had finally stood up to the billionaire. She felt exhausted but also strangely energized, like she had found a strength inside herself that she never knew existed. That feeling lasted exactly 3 hours. Tony was waiting for her when she arrived at Romano's for the lunch shift, and one look at his face told her that something was very wrong. He was sitting at their usual corner booth, but instead of his normal coffee and newspaper, there was a stack of official-looking papers spread across the table. His face looked older than it had just yesterday, and his hands were shaking slightly as he folded and refolded a napkin. "Mija, we need to talk," he said quietly, and Maria's stomach dropped like she was falling off a cliff. She slid into the booth across from him, her eyes scanning the papers. She could see letterheads from banks and law firms, documents with bold red stamps that said things like immediate payment required and final notice. Her mouth went dry as the pieces started falling into place. "Tony, what's happening?" The old man looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "They called in my loan, Maria. The bank that holds my mortgage, they want full payment in 30 days or they're foreclosing on the restaurant." His voice cracked on the last word. "I've been making payments on time for 15 years, never missed one, never even been late. But suddenly they need the money immediately." Maria stared at the papers, her mind racing. "This is because of last night, isn't it? Because of what I said to Blackstone?" Tony nodded miserably. "The bank manager called me this morning. He tried to be professional about it, but he let slip that they got a call from some investment firm that works with Blackstone. Apparently they bought my loan from the original bank last month. I never even knew it had been sold." The room seemed to spin around Maria. She had known there would be consequences for challenging a billionaire, but she hadn't thought about how those consequences might hurt the people she cared about. "How much do you owe?" $240,000. Tony's voice was barely a whisper. "Even if I sold everything I own, I couldn't come up with half that amount in 30 days. Maria felt sick. "So what does that mean?" "It means I have to sell to Blackstone's company. They're offering to pay off the loan and give me a little extra, enough to cover my medical bills and maybe rent a small apartment somewhere." Tony looked around the restaurant that had been his life's work. "But it also means I have to let you go, mija. Today. The new owners don't want any of the current staff." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. In one conversation, she had lost her job, Tony had lost his restaurant, and the heart of their community was being ripped out. All because she had dared to speak truth to power. I'm so sorry, Tony. This is all my fault. The old man reached across the table and took her hands. No, mija. You said what needed to be said. You stood up for all of us when no one else would. I'm proud of you, even if it's costing us everything. Maria cleaned out her locker with tears streaming down her face, packing 3 years of memories into a cardboard box. Her extra apron, the picture of her family she kept taped inside her locker door, the coffee mug Tony had given her last Christmas with "World's Best Waitress" printed on the side. Each item felt like she was saying goodbye to a piece of herself, but losing her job was just the beginning of her problems. Word traveled fast in a small town, and by Monday morning, everyone knew that Maria Santos was the waitress who had embarrassed Richard Blackstone at the town hall meeting. When she applied for a position at the diner on Route 9, the manager looked uncomfortable and said they weren't hiring. The grocery store needed cashiers, but the owner apologized and said his hands were tied. Even the gas station at the edge of town, which had a help wanted sign in the window for 3 months, suddenly didn't need any new employees. It took Maria a week to understand what was happening. Blackstone wasn't just buying properties in Millbrook. His companies and investment partners had business relationships with dozens of local employers. A quiet word in the right ear, a hint about future contracts or loan approvals, and suddenly no one could afford to hire the troublemaker who had made the billionaire look bad in front of the whole town. Maria's savings account, which had never been large to begin with, dwindled frighteningly fast. Without her income from Romano's, she couldn't help with Diego's college expenses. She couldn't contribute to the household bills that she and her mother shared. She couldn't even afford the gas to drive to the next town over to look for work. The worst part was watching her community crumble around her while she was powerless to stop it. Mrs. Chen closed her flower shop after 40 years, selling to Blackstone's company for a fraction of what it was worth, because she couldn't afford to fight the sudden increase in her building's property taxes. The Martinez brothers tried to hold on to their barbershop, but when their main supplier suddenly demanded payment in advance instead of the 30-day terms they had honored for a decade, they couldn't manage the cash flow one by one. The businesses that had made Main Street feel like home disappeared. Empty storefronts appeared overnight, their windows covered with brown paper and coming soon signs for businesses that would serve Blackstone's future residents instead of the families who had lived in Millbrook for generations. Maria found herself spending long hours, walking through downtown, watching construction crews gut the buildings she had known her entire life. Romano's was being transformed into something called Heritage Cafe, which would apparently serve organic coffee and artisanal pastries to people who could afford $12 sandwiches. The old pharmacy was becoming a boutique that would sell designer clothes to wealthy women from the city. 2 months after the town hall meeting, Maria hit rock bottom. She was sitting at her kitchen table staring at a pile of bills she couldn't pay when Diego called from college. Her little brother, who was supposed to be studying engineering and building bridges that would last forever, was calling to tell her he was dropping out. "I can't afford tuition anymore." "Maria," he said, and she could hear the defeat in his voice. "Without your help and with Dad's hours getting cut at the factory, we just don't have the money. I'm going to come home and get a job, try to help the family." Maria hung up the phone and cried harder than she had since their father died 5 years earlier. Diego was the smart one, the one who was going to make something of himself and lift their whole family up. He was supposed to be the success story that made all their sacrifices worthwhile. Now he was giving up his dreams because she had been foolish enough to think a waitress could stand up to a billionaire and win. That night, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe she was just a waitress who should have kept her mouth shut and accepted that powerful people always get what they want. Maybe fighting back had just made everything worse for everyone she loved. The next morning brought news that made her feel even lower. Tony Romano had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital. The stress of losing his restaurant, combined with his existing health problems, had finally overwhelmed his 72-year-old body. Maria sat in the hospital waiting room, holding Tony's hand while he slept, and wondered if her moment of courage had cost him his life. Outside the hospital window, she could see the skyline of Millbrook changing. Construction cranes dotted the horizon where luxury condos were rising from the ruins of her childhood. Blackstone's vision was becoming reality, and there was nothing left of the community she had tried to save. Maria had learned the hardest lesson of her life. Sometimes speaking truth to power doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you how powerless you really are. Maria was working the night shift at a cleaning company 2 towns over when her life started to change again. It was 3 in the morning, and she was vacuuming the hallways of an office building, trying not to think about how this was as far from her business degree dreams as she could possibly get. The pay was barely enough to cover gas and groceries, and she only got the job because the cleaning supervisor didn't care about local politics or billionaire grudges. Her phone buzzed with a message from someone she didn't recognize. Usually she ignored unknown numbers, but something about this one made her pause. The message was simple. "Hi Maria, my name is Katie Chen. I'm a documentary filmmaker and I'd like to talk to you about what happened in Millbrook. Would you be willing to have a conversation?" Maria stared at the screen, wondering if this was some kind of joke or trap. After everything that had happened, she had learned to be suspicious of strangers offering help. But when she got home that morning, exhaustion won over caution and she found herself typing back, "How did you get my number and what do you want?" Katie's response came quickly. She explained that she had been following stories about small communities fighting corporate development across the country. A friend of a friend had shared a video that someone had recorded on their phone during the town hall meeting. The video showed Maria's entire speech to Blackstone, and it had been passed around on social media until it reached Katie's attention. "I've been documenting these stories for 2 years," Katie wrote. "What you said that night, the way you stood up for your community, it represents something that's happening all over America. People need to hear your story." Maria was skeptical. She had been burned by trusting people before, and the idea of putting herself in the spotlight again terrified her. But Katie was patient. She sent examples of her previous work, documentaries about factory workers fighting plant closures and farmers dealing with corporate agriculture. The stories were honest and respectful, focused on the people rather than sensationalizing their struggles. After a week of messages back and forth, Maria agreed to meet Katie at a coffee shop in the next town over. She was expecting someone polished and professional, maybe trying to use her story to advance their own career. Instead, Katie turned out to be a 35-year-old woman who drove a beat-up Honda and carried her camera equipment in grocery bags. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio that had been bought out by developers when she was in high school, and she understood exactly what Maria was going through. "I'm not here to make you famous," Katie said over coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner for hours. "I'm here because your story matters and because there are thousands of other people facing the same thing you faced. They need to know they're not alone." The filming process took 3 months. Katie came to Millbrook several times, interviewing not just Maria but also Tony Romano, who was slowly recovering from his heart attack, Mrs. Chen, the Martinez brothers, and dozens of other community members. She documented the empty storefronts, the construction sites where familiar buildings used to stand, and the faces of people who were watching their world disappear. But Katie also traveled to other places, showing Maria that Millbrook's story wasn't unique. There was a fishing village in Maine, where luxury hotels were displacing families who had lived there for 6 generations. A farming community in Iowa, where corporate agriculture was buying out small farms and turning them into massive industrial operations. A neighborhood in Detroit where gentrification was forcing out the families who had stayed and fought to rebuild their community for decades. Watching Katie work taught Maria something important. Change didn't happen because one person gave one speech. Change happened when people connected their stories, when they realized that their individual struggles were part of something bigger. Katie showed her how to research property records, how to understand zoning laws, how to trace the web of shell companies and investment firms that allowed billionaires like Blackstone to operate in the shadows. The documentary, which Katie called The True Cost of Progress, premiered at a film festival in Chicago 8 months after the town hall meeting. Maria had never been to a film festival before, and she felt completely out of place among the industry professionals and critics. But when the lights went down and she saw her story on the big screen, she understood why Katie had fought so hard to tell it. The film wasn't just about Millbrook. It was about what America was losing when communities like hers disappeared. It showed the human cost of treating neighborhoods like investment opportunities instead of places where real people lived real lives. and it asked difficult questions about who got to decide how communities changed and grew. The response was overwhelming. The documentary won awards and got picked up by streaming platforms. Suddenly, Maria's phone was ringing with interview requests from newspapers and radio shows. Her speech to Blackstone was being shared millions of times on social media, with people posting their own stories about communities under threat, but the most important call came from an organization called the National Community Development Fund. They had watched the documentary and wanted to offer Maria a job as a regional coordinator, helping other communities develop strategies to preserve their character while allowing for thoughtful growth. We need someone who understands what it's like to fight for a place you love, the director told her during a video call. We need someone who can talk to people who are facing what you faced, who can help them find their own solutions. The job would require Maria to travel throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, working with communities that were dealing with everything from corporate buyouts to factory closures to environmental disasters. It would mean learning about historic preservation, cooperative business models, community organizing, and sustainable development. Most importantly, it would mean she could make a living doing work that actually mattered. Maria's first assignment was in a small town in Ohio, where a fracking company wanted to lease farmland that had been in families for generations. She sat in another community center, listening to farmers and small business owners express the same fears she had felt in Millbrook. But this time, instead of feeling powerless, she felt prepared. She had spent months learning from Katie how to research corporate ownership structures. She had studied examples of communities that had successfully negotiated with large companies to protect local interests. She had connected with lawyers who specialized in community development and environmental protection. Most importantly, she had learned that fighting back didn't mean you had to fight alone. The Ohio farmers had been isolated, thinking they were the only ones facing this problem. Maria showed them examples of other agricultural communities that had found ways to benefit from energy development without sacrificing their land or their way of life. She helped them organize, research their options, and develop a negotiating strategy that protected their interests while still allowing for economic development. 6 months later, the farmers had signed a deal that gave them fair compensation while preserving their ability to continue farming. More importantly, they had learned skills they could use to protect their community in the future. Maria discovered that she was good at this work. Her business degree, which had seemed useless when she was cleaning office buildings at 3 a.m, turned out to be exactly what she needed to understand complex development deals and financing structures. Her experience at Romano's had taught her how to listen to people, how to make them feel heard and understood. And her confrontation with Blackstone had given her something invaluable. She was no longer afraid of powerful people. Over the next year, Maria worked with 15 different communities across 3 states. She helped a former mining town in West Virginia develop a tourism strategy that honored their history instead of trying to erase it. She worked with a neighborhood in Cleveland that was fighting predatory lending practices that were designed to force longtime residents out of their homes. She even returned to Maine to help that fishing village find ways to accommodate new residents without destroying the fishing industry that had sustained them for generations. Each success felt like a small victory against the forces that had destroyed Millbrook. Maria couldn't bring back Romano's or Mrs. Chen's flower shop, but she could help other communities avoid the same fate. She was learning that sometimes the best way to heal from your own wounds is to help others avoid getting wounded in the first place. For the first time since that night at the town hall meeting, Maria felt like she had found her purpose. Maria was reviewing development proposals in her hotel room in Pittsburgh when she got the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in November, almost exactly 2 years since that first town hall meeting that had turned her world upside down. She had just finished helping a community in western Pennsylvania negotiate a deal that would bring a sustainable manufacturing plant to their area without displacing existing residents. The call came from Mayor Johnson back in Millbrook. His voice sounded different than she remembered, more confident and less nervous. "Maria, I know this might sound crazy, but I need to ask you something. How would you feel about coming home?" Maria set down her pen and gave him her full attention. She had been back to Millbrook only twice since leaving, both times to visit Tony Romano, who was slowly recovering from his heart attack. Each visit had been painful, Seeing the empty lots where familiar businesses used to stand and the half-finished luxury condos that looked like expensive tombstones, marking the death of her community. "What's going on, Mayor?" "Blackstone's development is failing," Mayor Johnson said, and Maria could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Those luxury condos he built? Most of them are empty. The high-end retail spaces can't find tenants. The whole project is hemorrhaging money and his investors are getting nervous." Maria felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that he's looking to sell the entire development to cut his losses. But here's the interesting part. We've been contacted by a development company called Community First Partners. They specialize in sustainable, community-centered projects. They want to buy Blackstone's mess and turn it into something that actually serves the people who live here." Community First Partners. Maria knew that name. She had worked with them on a project in Ohio where they had helped transform an abandoned shopping mall into a mixed-use community center with affordable housing, local businesses, and shared spaces for residents. They were one of the few development companies that actually understood what communities needed. "They asked specifically about you, Maria," the mayor continued. "They said they've been following your work, and they want you to lead the redevelopment planning process. They want someone who understands Millbrook, who knows what we lost and what we need to rebuild." Maria stared out the hotel window at Pittsburgh's skyline, thinking about all the communities she had helped over the past 2 years. She had become good at parachuting into troubled places, solving problems, and moving on to the next crisis. But she had never had the chance to build something from the ground up, to create the kind of community she had always dreamed of. "When do they want to meet?" 3 weeks later, Maria stood in the middle of what used to be Main Street, wearing a hard hat and safety vest, surrounded by representatives from Community First Partners, local residents, and a crowd of people she hadn't seen in 2 years. The luxury condos loomed overhead like expensive monuments to failed dreams, but Maria was no longer looking at them with sadness. She was seeing possibilities. Tony Romano was there, moving slowly but with his old spark back in his eyes. Mrs. Chen had come from the apartment where she now lived with her daughter, curious to see what all the fuss was about. Even the Martinez brothers had driven up from the town where they had relocated their barbershop, wondering if there might be a chance to come home. The plan Maria had developed with Community First Partners was ambitious but realistic. Instead of tearing down Blackstone's buildings, they would convert the luxury condos into affordable housing for working families. The empty retail spaces would be redesigned to accommodate local businesses, with rent subsidies and business support programs to help entrepreneurs get started. The oversized community center that Blackstone had built for wealthy residents would become exactly what it claimed to be, a real community center where everyone was welcome. But the heart of the plan was something entirely new. Where Romano's restaurant had once stood, they would build a community kitchen and business incubator. Local food entrepreneurs could rent commercial kitchen space by the hour. Cooking classes would bring people together. There would be a small restaurant space that local chefs could use to test their concepts before opening their own places. "This isn't about going back to the way things were," Maria explained to the crowd that had gathered around her. "We can't bring back the old Millbrook, and honestly, the old Millbrook had problems too. Limited opportunities for young people, not enough affordable housing, businesses struggling to stay afloat. What we're building is better. It's what Millbrook could have become if we had been allowed to grow and change on our own terms." The first person to sign on was Tony Romano. At 74, he wasn't ready to run a full restaurant again, but he loved the idea of mentoring young chefs and occasionally cooking for special events. "It's perfect, mija," he told Maria with tears in his eyes. "I get to cook when I want to, and I get to help other people follow their dreams." What more could an old man ask for? Mrs. Chen was next, excited about the possibility of opening a smaller flower shop that could also offer gardening classes and sell plants for the community garden that would be built in one of the empty lots. The Martinez brothers drove up every weekend to plan their return, designing a barbershop that would also serve as a gathering place for men to talk and play dominoes like their grandfather had done in the old country. But the project attracted new people too. Young families who had been priced out of bigger cities saw an opportunity to buy affordable homes in a community that was actively building something special. Recent college graduates were drawn to the business incubator program and the chance to start their own companies with support and mentoring. Artists and craftspeople loved the idea of studios and galleries integrated into the downtown area. The transformation took 18 months, but Maria was there for every step of it. She had moved back to Millbrook permanently, renting a small apartment above what would become the new bakery. Every morning she walked through the construction sites, checking progress and solving problems. Every evening she attended community meetings where residents planned everything from the community garden layout to the programming for the new library that would occupy part of the former luxury retail space. The project wasn't without challenges. Funding was complicated, requiring a mixture of grants, low-interest loans, and creative financing arrangements. Some longtime residents were skeptical about change, even positive change. There were construction delays and budget overruns and 100 small crises that threatened to derail everything. But Maria had learned how to navigate these challenges during her 2 years of community development work. More importantly, she had learned how to bring people together, how to help them see past their individual concerns to the bigger picture of what they were building together. The grand opening celebration took place on a warm Saturday in May, exactly 3 years after Maria's confrontation with Blackstone. The community center was packed with families. The new restaurants were serving food from recipes that had been perfected in the community kitchen, and children were playing in spaces that had been designed specifically for them. Maria stood on the small stage where a local band was setting up for the evening concert, looking out at the crowd of people who had made this transformation possible. She saw Tony Romano teaching a group of teenagers how to make his famous meatballs. She saw Mrs. Chen selling flower arrangements to people who were decorating their new homes. She saw the Martinez brothers giving free haircuts to kids who were excited about the new community pool. But what made her proudest was seeing people she didn't recognize, new residents who had been drawn to Millbrook because of what it was becoming, rather than what it had been. They were talking with longtime residents, sharing stories and making plans for block parties and neighborhood cleanups and all the small activities that build real community. Richard Blackstone was nowhere to be seen, of course. His failed development had cost him millions of dollars and damaged his reputation in the industry. But Maria rarely thought about him anymore. She had learned that the best revenge against people who try to destroy communities is to build something so beautiful and successful that it makes their failures irrelevant. As the sun set over Millbrook, Maria felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. She had come home not as the frightened waitress who had once challenged a billionaire, but as a confident leader who had proven that communities could control their own destiny if they were willing to work together. The plaque by the door of the community center read simply, "Built by the community, for the community, with hope for the future." It was exactly what Maria had always dreamed of, a place where everyone belonged.